weather. Tonight, we are in our old home, the McCullum room, and we have all of you at home listening in via Zoom. When we finish with the presentation tonight, people in the room who want to ask Jeff questions, if you could come to my computer over at the left, which is on Zoom, and ask your question from that computer. It will be as if you are on Zoom and asking a question, so the people at home will be able to hear you. So if you could just walk up and come over there, or line up if there are a number of you who have questions. We're hoping this will work pretty well. And of course, because we can do it by Zoom, we can record it and put it up on our website. So people who aren't able to be here in person or on Zoom tonight will be able to listen to this. So I very much want to welcome Jeffrey and Thalia Oster, who come to us from Gunnison. I jokingly said that they are the responsible for bringing the snow over the mountain from the western slope, but I don't want to antagonize them. And I think Thalia would like to say a few words from Colorado League.
Thank you.
Come in front of the screen.
Oh, right. Hi, everybody. I just wanted to say a quick hello from the State Board of Directors. I am on the board and am your brand new treasurer. So I just wanted to introduce myself. If you have any questions statewide, financially, whatever kind of, especially with the new transition, you can always find me. And also I have a couple of announcements from the state board. In case you don't already know, we do have two brand new task forces. One is the JEDI task force, which did start last spring. Obviously, it stands for Justice, Equity, Diversion, and Inclusion. But this year, they're going to be focusing on immigration and mass deportation, and they've already kicked into gear. And then the other one is the Civic Education Task Force, which started just maybe a month ago, with the goal of creating civic lessons for all levels. I think K through 12, college level, and adults as refresher courses. And as I understand, you guys have worked on a civic lesson about the federal judiciary, which I think fits in perfectly. Also, an upcoming event is a sort of a meet and greet at Molly Brown House on the 20th of February. We will be welcoming.
They're letting people in.
Nominees for leaders in democracy, and this year they are the Attorney General Phil Weiser and the DA for the 21st Judicial District Dan Rubenstein, who worked together standing up for election integrity in Mesa County, and I'm sure you're all aware of what took place there. And then also the League of Women Voters Colorado nominating committee is looking for recruits, so now's the time to take your expertise up another level. And I may want to introduce our president who just walked in. Irene Tynes is the president of the Colorado board, and I imagine she's a member of this league. All right, thank you. Jeff?
Well, usually a bio able to introduce a speaker. This speaker has steadfastly resisted my request to send a bio. So Jeff Oster is a retired podiatrist, and he and Thalia come from the Gunnison Valley, and maybe having a specialization in feet, it gives him a grounding. I had to get a pun in somewhere in helping us to deal with the current circumstances that we are facing, where democracy is under attack from many different directions. So without further ado, Jeff.
Thanks.
One distinct advantage here, I'm just a pinch taller than both Sue and Thalia. So for people who are here, we'll be able to see over. Ooh, technical difficulties. Can't advance the slides at all.
Get rid of this, might help.
See that.
Stop share for a second. Was on here before I was trying to see. All right.
Sue, thank you for tonight. Perlene, thanks for the technical help. Yeah. When I was a young boy, I was probably 12 or 13. We belonged to a Presbyterian church very similar to this outside of St. Louis, Missouri. And I was struggling with Christianity at the time. We were reading out of a brochure, dear Lord, I've done all these terrible things this week. And so leaving the church, I looked at my dad and I said, how can you do this? How can this be meaningful to you? And some of the best advice my dad ever gave me was, why don't you just get out of it what you need? And I really, coming back into a big Presbyterian church like this, I have a lot of those same thoughts when we were younger. I'm a rambler. I like to wander around during conversations like this, but I think technically tonight that doesn't work for the folks at home. If I do wander off screen, you'll know that I started to wander, and I'll wander back. This study started about a year ago in January. I originally went to my league in Gunnison and said, I'm concerned about the First Amendment. I'm concerned whether this new trend in politics and new trend in religion is strong enough to overpower the First Amendment. And I was relatively new. I watched my wife ascend through the league and saw the efficacy of her role. And so going to my league, they said, well, you need to start a study. And the study began, and ultimately what we're here for today isn't the study, we're here for the position. The position is the words that are derived from the study that represent us. So a vote in favor of this is a vote in favor of the position. The study is just all the background for ultimately for the position. Make sense? Okay, because we will all own these words if we vote in a positive way for this. Am I cutting out?
Yeah.
Had to keep up here. Okay. I'm standing on one foot while I'm rubbing my tummy. Yes. Well, let's take a look at this. The charge of the study was to determine the need for a position. And as a study group, we looked through historical background for the separation of church and state. We also looked at contemporary issues related to freedom of religion. And what's been interesting for me, I came into this study, I think, with my own personal biases. I was ready to put my fists up and defend the state from the church. But over the course of this project, I think what's happened to me is that my sharp edges have rounded a little bit. And I've found that the study isn't so much about the defense of the state from the church. It's more the defense of the personal freedom of the exercise of religion. Now, what we'll look at tonight is the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause of the First Amendment. There are other clauses, freedom to assembly, freedom of speech. We won't be looking at those. We're looking specifically at the Establishment Clause and Free Exercise Clause associated with this concept of separation from church and state. The recommended religious freedom position has changed a bit. In fact, it changed following our last meeting. Members have said, make it more direct, make it to the point. So we haven't so much changed the words, but the structure of the position has changed a little bit. And it reads as follows. The League of Women Voters of Colorado stands for the separation of church and state and religious freedom founded upon religious pluralism and individual conscience, free of social or political influence by any religious body. These fundamental civil rights are threatened by religious nationalism. The First Amendment of the Constitution reads, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. The League of Women Voters of Colorado believes that the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause of the First Amendment are cornerstones of our democracy. A month ago, this would, the last sentence of the first paragraph would have read, we feel that these civil rights may be threatened by religious nationalism. Well, the change in the position came about from the United States Supreme Court accepting a case from Oklahoma. In Oklahoma, the Tulsa Archdiocese has promoted a charter school that would be a taxpayer-funded religious school. The lower courts in Oklahoma said, no, that's a violation of the First Amendment. The Oklahoma Supreme Court said, no, that's a violation of the First Amendment. And the people who want to bring this school forward, along with the school board, have said that they still want to have this program go on now. To have this program. Hang on here, we got anybody? Go on now. There we go. Sorry about that. Paradoxically, the U.S. Supreme Court has said, we would like to review this case. Now, the challenge here is that in 2020, there was a case called Espinoza versus Montana State Department of Revenue, where Espinoza wanted to go to a religious school, challenged the courts, took it to the Supreme Court, and John Roberts wrote the opinion in 2020 that said that if the state is going to fund private schools, the state then also needs to fund religious schools. Now, what this current Supreme Court has a tendency to do is to leave doors open, back doors open. And I think what we'll see is that the Espinoza case is going to be significant when the U.S. Supreme Court hears this case from Tulsa, Oklahoma, likely in April, with a decision sometime in the summer. I don't know what to expect with this, but I think it's going to be an interesting time. We've also recently heard in the news of the office that's going to be in the White House. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But my concern is that when we change these words from may be threatened to our rights are threatened, I think we're at a time where we as a league need to take a stance. The structure of the study, we alluded to that the study itself is a platform for the position. The position is the most important part that we'll be looking at tonight. I would suggest, though, that you go to this webpage listed here, lwvcolorado.org/study. You'll be able to view the study itself. You'll be able to make comments and recommendations related to the study. But in a little bit different format, I've interviewed a number of different personalities related to this study. Two are personalities of faith who are part of the Poor People's Campaign. One is a constitutional professor from CU who specialized in the First Amendment. We had a long conversation. So if you're an insomniac, make sure you watch that one. But it's a great conversation. He really helped kind of soften some of my sharp edges. The study is structured so that each league has one vote, and each league then has one vote that is weighted by the size of your league in relationship to the total number of state members. So a league like Gunnison is going to have a little bit less vote than a league like Denver. Voting will take place between March 1st and March 31st. It'll take place as a poll on the same webpage, LWVcolorado.org/study. So it's incumbent upon each league to come up with their method of finding consensus. Each league needs to come to consensus and needs to then submit their vote. Does that make sense? Okay, I know there's some kinks in here. One of the problems we found was that the method of voting that we had is very much like the Electoral College, winner takes all. And of course, we're trying to, eliminate the Electoral College, so bad on us. A simple majority is needed for approval of this. This is probably the most important line in this entire presentation, and it's the fact that it's very easy to talk about all the things that you're against. We see this all day long on the news and then social media. It's harder to talk about the things that we stand for. We're here tonight to talk about the rule of law and to talk about the Constitution, specifically the First Amendment. In our effort to put together this study, we had challenges with partisan language. We had problems with bias. We tried not to be anti-clerical or anti-church. We tried not to be anti-government. We're trying to present the facts as we see them. Some of the language that you might see, you might seem to think that, gosh, words like Christian right or Christian
There's
national
only 14 participants.
are oh, that's okay. That you might find these to be partisan. We've gone round and round with this, and what we've discovered is that you can't have this conversation without using these words. They're essential to the conversation. They're a part of common vernacular that we have within our community and within our media. So bear with us as we go through this, and I hope that in the end you'll agree that these are necessary words. Definitions, we've already talked about the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause. The free exercise of religion, our study group defines as the free exercise of religion as an inalienable right to practice individual spiritual beliefs, free in conscience and respectful of pluralism and the rule of law. Religious nationalism, I think we'll see tonight, it's a hard thing to define. Is it religion? Is it politics? Is it a mix of the two? Our study group defined it as any actualized act, and we'll come back to that, or law that respects or requires the establishment of religion or prohibits the free exercise of religion resulting in a violation of the rule of law or individual civil rights of any U.S. citizen or group. Now, in a previous conversation, someone said, well, that's redundant, an actualized act. Well, if you attack the Capitol to attempt to make some sort of legislative change, that's an act. If you attack the Capitol and you prohibit the certification of the election, that would be an actualized act. Also, you'll see emphasis throughout this about civil rights. When I speak with the U.S. League about this concept and defending the First Amendment, the U.S. League wants objectivity. They want clarity. Civil rights violations are the clearest objective that the U.S. League wants. So in this wording, as we say that religion or prohibits the free exercise of religion resulting in a violation of the rule of law or individual civil rights. That's our attempt to try to remain as objective as we can. The rule of law, let's jump forward. The World Justice Project describes it as a durable system of laws, institutions, norms, and community commitment that delivers 4 universal principles: accountability, just laws, open government, and accessible and impartial justice. Sounds like a place where I would like to live. It sounds like a place that I don't live in right now, and particularly accessible and impartial justice is a concern for me. Partisanship, we all know ourselves to be nonpartisan. I think some of that depends upon your audience. And I know in our small world in Gunnison with Proposition 89, we were labeled as absolutely partisan. I still believe that with Proposition 89 last year that we were focusing on the issues, and those issues were important to this particular organization. In the second paragraph, partisan is actually most often used as an adjective referring to a political party. We just want to make sure that we're careful and stay true to the guiding principles of the League. These are the words that drove a few people away from our group. When we started to use these kind of words in the study, in fact, I met 2 people last week who said, you know, it's a great study. I appreciate what you're doing. But when we started to use words like Christian nationalists and the religious right, they said, I just don't feel comfortable. I realize I'm in a big Presbyterian church. I realize I'm surrounded by many Christians. These are not words that are unique to any one party. These are words that I think by the end of this conversation tonight, and I do want to stress it's a conversation. Any questions? Or are we going to save those to the end? Yeah, as you give things, I can repeat the question. But I hope that you'll understand these words by the end of this conversation. I hope that the slide will change by the end of this conversation. So I think a good starting point is Connor. Can you hear me if I speak this loud? Oh, got another one. No, we're doing pretty good with what we got here. Oh, all righty. So a good place to start is, were we founded as a Christian nation? How many people would say here that we were founded as a Christian nation? Anyone? Last meeting, I had a good handful of people who said we were founded as a Christian nation. I think a good way to look at this, Robert Ingersoll, he was known as the Great Agnostic. He would travel the country in the last quarter of the 19th century, 1875 to 1900, spoke off the back of trains, filled circus tents, because his approach, I think, was perceived to be pretty outrageous, and it was unique for the time to say the words that he would say about the founders. Regarding the founders, he said they knew that to put God in the Constitution was to put man out. They knew that the recognition of a deity would be seized upon by fanatics and zealots as a pretext for destroying the liberty of thought. The founders knew the terrible history of the church too well to place in her keeping, or in her keeping of her God, the sacred rights of man. They intended that all should have the right to worship or not to worship, that our laws should make no distinction on creed. They intended to found and frame a government for man and for man alone. They wished to preserve the individuality of all, to prevent the few from governing the many, and the many from persecuting and destroying the few. Those are strong words. And when we gave our first presentation in Bailey, I had the opportunity to meet a fellow named Scott, and I'm going to carry Scott on my left shoulder. Scott's a Quaker, and he gave me I think valuable feedback regarding this. But I'm also going to bring another person with me too, and this is John. John is a Southern Baptist minister who has reviewed these slides and given me tepid approval. He didn't want to be the first Southern Baptist minister to be endorsing the First Amendment. But in this case, John, my Quaker buddy, said, well, that's pretty one-sided if you just use Robert Ingersoll as your one source for that. And so, you know, in keeping with being open with this, I jumped onto Google and looked for quotes as to how we were founded as a Christian nation. There are no quotes to describe how we were founded as a Christian nation. Now, 2 points here. Were we founded with Christian traditions? Of course. You know, I think that's very true. And the second point, I was called out by a member from Boulder who said that using Google AI completely invalidates the study, that it's not a source, it's a tool. And I just want to make sure you understand that Google AI is only used in my presentation and is nowhere in the study. Okay? Come on. Sorry, I can't get the slides to advance here. So did you hear the one about the rabbi, the minister, and the wait, Perlene, I can't get this to advance. Share again.
Yeah, see that.
Or two here.
Very good.
This is
Like
not
stuck.
reliable computer. Yeah, maybe that best.
We are getting to other things, so I think it's,
Yeah, there's something else that's
oh, it's the vast again. Ooh, so,
okay. Back to moving.
okay. But are you not in Zoom anymore? Let's see.
Right.
All right. Share again. All right. You apparently weren't on one foot there.
Yeah. We're patting my tummy, huh? We are back. All righty. So religious nationalism, it's difficult. It's a moving target. It's a political party. It's a religious party. We came up with an idea to use a traffic light scenario. And in this case, a green light would be a positive interaction that would be covered by free speech, no civil rights violations. A yellow light would be caution. A red light would be a civil rights violation. In this case, we have two US citizens, both who are Muslim from Afghanistan, talking in a coffee shop about how they believe that the Islamic State in Afghanistan has a positive impact on their society. Would this be free speech? Would you all agree? Free speech, that's what we would say as well. Now, this case is a little bit different. In this case, in West Virginia, the Fellowship of Christian Athletes gave a presentation, and the entire school was forced to go to the presentation. 4 students who were not Christian said, I don't want to go to this. They were forced to go to it, I'm assuming just because their teachers had to grade papers. And they recorded the presentation. They showed their families the presentation, and these 4 families sued the school district for forcing their students to participate in a religious activity at a publicly funded school. Interestingly, all 4 families then reimbursed the school district the money that they had won in the suit. But point being that forced prayer in schools is illegal. Now, voluntary prayer is certainly legal. I forget the case name by the Supreme Court, but it dates back to the 40s, where if you are voluntary in your action and you go to a place that's quiet, you can participate in prayer. This was probably most seen in a recent case with a football coach who wanted to pray with his players. The Supreme Court laid it out that he did that in a way that was quiet and sequestered off into it. Actually, he was on the 50-yard line with all the families surrounding him, but he also left the school before the case even went to the Supreme Court. Again, here's the Supreme Court trying to leave these doors open, you know, for religious activities at publicly funded institutions. I'm sorry that bar is in the way. Are we able to move that up?
That'd be minimized at one point though.
That would be good enough, like that.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
there you go. Oop. Back one.
Sorry.
Sure. I think that one will disappear.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, hopefully. Okay, another example, in Colorado Springs, when we first started this study, 2 different people sent me YouTube videos of Mayor Mobilati from Colorado Springs participating in the Fire and Glory tent revival. And I mean to tell you, there was fire and glory. There was preaching that, you know, would go beyond preaching, and it was all about the integration of patriotism and putting God back into schools. Mayor Mobilati, as a representative of the city, came and spoke. But when you listen to the conversations at the revival, Mayor Mobilati was a Christian, speaking to other Christians. He didn't bring in his office as it was going to be a vehicle for Christianity. Again, a yellow light, I think, because even though it may not be the best example of where he should have been, he didn't violate any civil rights. Would you agree? Okay, a lot of people disagree with that one. Now we go one step further. Last night we had a presentation and I was speaking about Mike Johnson. Somebody said, "You mean the mayor of Denver?" No, I mean the Speaker of the House of Representatives of the U.S. House. Mike Johnson flies a flag outside of his office. It's a pine tree flag that was originally flown by the ships in the Revolutionary War and then was adopted by the state of Maine and recently has been adopted by an organization called the New Apostolic Reformation. The New Apostolic Reformation and the Seven Mountain Mandate are the two organizations that provide a coalition for Christians to come together. When could you get a Presbyterian to talk to a Catholic? When could you get a Catholic to talk to a Jew? In this case, this is a coalition that brings people together. There's an interesting article in the most recent Atlantic magazine that profiles New Apostolic Reformation group in Lancaster County. Have you seen that? So, yeah, it's a good profile. Homespun, but serious about bringing religion into the seven mountains. Thalia and I practice this. Media, sports, government, education, religion, entertainment, and every car wash in America. Yeah, government, I guess. Yeah, but the point is, these are vehicles to bring religion, and in this case, Christianity, into our government, being championed by the person who is third in line to the White House. This flag is also flown at Sam Alito's beach house. Now, we don't know if it's his wife or Sam that, flies it. She's a character and a half. But the Appeal to Heaven flag is a symbol. There's also other flags. If you drive around the South, you see all these different religious connotations of flags that promote the integration of Christianity into our government. Now, one of my favorite people, Representative Boebert, speaking at the Cornerstone Christian Center in Basalt, and I can't do this without pretending to be here, where she said the church is supposed to direct the government, and the government is not supposed to direct the church. That's how our founding fathers intended it. I'm tired of this separation of church and state junk. It's not in the Constitution. It was in a stinking letter, and it means nothing like they say it does. Well, we'll talk about the Johnson Amendment here in a little bit, which prohibits clergy from speaking politics from the pulpit. Now, maybe Lauren is a little different, but what she's referring to is a letter from the Danbury Baptists that went to Thomas Jefferson. The Anglican Church, prior to the formation of the Constitution, and in our colonies as they came together, the Anglican Church was the antecedent to the Church of England and then the Puritans. But the Anglican Church still wielded power, and the Baptists were prevented from having confession. And they went to Thomas Jefferson and said, "Can you help us?" And he did. And subsequently, we started to see more pluralism. Lauren, though, she has a different way to deliver. So as we start to define Christian nationalism, Andrew Seidel has written a couple of great books. He's an attorney that works currently for Americans United for the separation of church and state. He's litigated cases in front of the Supreme Court. He says that legal questions of religious freedom are not always simple. They can be complicated and more often emotionally fraught. But in their push to weaponize religious freedom, the Crusaders, and we'll define that, have misled and confounded many Americans about where to draw the legal lines for this founding American principle. Now, the Crusaders, this is the book that he wrote, The American Crusade, How the Supreme Court is Weaponizing Religious Freedom. I think it's an appropriate definition. I think there is an attempt at a crusade. And we'll talk a little bit more about this. One of the points that my wife always makes about this slide is that we've seen so many yellow stoplights. How many yellow stoplights do we see before those actions that are questionable become normalized? And this is what Andrew Seidel is saying, is that it's not simple and the lines become blurred. Seidel again says that Christian nationalism is a battle for the privileged, the few who believe in the correct version of the correct God, waged at the expense of those who don't. They're not conquering land, but it is a war of conquest. At the most basic level, they're seeking privilege to codify supremacy. Last Thursday at the National Prayer Breakfast, the man who took an oath with his hand on a Bible. Oh, no. Oh, that was right. Yeah. The man who took an oath with his hand off of the Bible established in the White House a faith office to fight anti-Christian bias. The person with the very large eyelashes behind him is Paula White, a televangelist who will now reside in an office in the White House. Come on now. I would be very proud to be the first man arrested on the Western Slope for promulgating anti-Christian bias. I just think it's a goal that I have. But this is government by fiat. This is an attempt with an executive order to overwrite the Constitution. And this is what we're up against, I think, in this battle for the First Amendment. So what is this privilege that everyone is looking for? In the second paragraph here, in a religious context, privilege refers to an unearned advantage or special benefit granted to individuals based on their religious affiliation, often stemming from the dominant religious belief in society, allowing them to practice their faith freely and experience societal advantages that may not be available to other people of other faiths, or, and underline this next, or no faith at all. Essentially, it means having societal benefits due to the widespread acceptance of your religious beliefs. When we spoke to, I think it was Arapahoe Douglas, one of the members was a retired Presbyterian minister, and she said, you need to understand that you're coming from two different places. And she got me thinking about this, and I through my daughter-in-law, found this book by Matthew Taylor, who describes that religious nationalism as a religious movement is something that can only be addressed with theology. Now, I call myself a theologist. I like to study religion. I like the parables. I like the stories, but I'm not a theologian. In Matthew Taylor's book, he drills down deep into the Old Testament, and he describes religious nationalism, and more specifically Christian nationalism in this case, as a three-pronged pitchfork. The first prong are the traditional Catholics. The traditional Catholics are the folks who are still angry about the Vatican II, about changes in the church that made the church more accessible, had mass in English, and they're still upset that that has been a blight on Catholicism. The second prong in the pitchfork are the traditional Protestants. These are the Pete Hegeseths of the world, who have the cross of Jerusalem, which was a cross for the Crusades, tattooed on his chest. He also has on his biceps, I'd have to look it up again, but it was because God wills, and again, a part of the Crusades. These are individuals who believe that there is now a time for a battle for the presence of Christianity in this country. And then the third prong of the pitchfork are all the other folks. The folks that say, well, I'm Christian, but I don't go to church. Or, my mom was a Christian, so I guess I'm a Christian. And I think that this would represent a lot of the folks who stormed the Capitol with flags that say that Trump is my president and Jesus is my Lord. Now, I can't look into the future, but I would see that the first two prongs of the pitchfork, the heady theologians of traditional Catholicism and the heady theologians of traditional Christianity, that they would do the thinking and the planning. And the third group would be the guys who would assault I don't know, the community center or whatever is going to happen in this world as folks who are serious about Christian nationalism try to implement their view of the world. Wonderful book by Matt Taylor. It'll scare you to death. Any questions so far? No? Let me grab a little something to drink here. So in the 1700s, from about 1730 to about 1760, there was 22,000 people who left the Church of England to come form what was called the City on the Hill. The City on the Hill was the new theology formed by the Puritans. Now, the Puritans were not nice people. If you think of the Scarlet Letter, the Salem witch trials, these were the Puritans who believed that their view of Christianity was the only view. Now, Roger Williams was a Puritan, came to the New World. United States hadn't been formed yet, but he came and he saw what the Puritans were doing. And this wasn't the Roger Williams that was the king of the road, that knew every lock that ain't locked when no one's around. Different Roger Williams, but he was appalled by what he saw with the Puritans. He was financially well off enough that he spoke to the Narragansett Indians and bought the land, which is now Rhode Island. In Rhode Island, he established a new religion, and this was the Baptist faith. Roger wanted to try to find some degree of pluralism where people could exercise their religious rights free of conscience and respectful of other people. The Puritans, on the other hand, did not believe in that and wanted to coalesce into their own theology. At the same time, William Penn was in Pennsylvania. He was having another religious pluralism experiment, mostly with the Germans and the Dutch and the Swedes. And ultimately, that became what we now know as Pennsylvania. The Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, if this is working, I'm just going to stick with it. Pardon the thing that's blocking the view here. Thomas Jefferson in 1786 wrote this document as a precursor to the U.S. Constitution. The key points of this were that no one can be forced to attend a religious service or to support a religious institution. If you were in Massachusetts and you didn't go to church and you didn't tithe, you would not be allowed to be employed in the community. It was a theology that was extremely limiting. People cannot be harmed for their religious beliefs. They can express and defend their beliefs. Doesn't affect their civil rights, and these are natural rights. So to fast forward through history here, 1786 was the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, and I think it was the defining document for our Constitution that does not include a God. These 13 colonies were trying to come together to create some kind of document and realized that it was virtually impossible to have one entity, one church. And fortunately, Jefferson wrote this Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom. Bill of Rights, mostly written by James Madison, ratified 2 years later in 1789. The Treaty of Tripoli, anybody familiar with this? It's a talking point for were we founded as a Christian nation or not. It's the first time that the United States says publicly that we were not founded as a Christian nation. Even though we created a treaty with Tripoli so they wouldn't steal our merchant ships along the northern shores of Africa, we failed to pay the money for the treaty. And so it was rewritten and didn't include these words that America is not founded in any sense as a Christian nation. Conservatives would then say, well, it's obvious then, it really wasn't true. We were founded as a Christian nation. So it's a small point, but when you hear about the Treaty of Tripoli, know that somebody's having an argument about our founding. As we move forward in history and come to the Civil War, I think a horrible time, families torn apart. If we think today is difficult with politics, this was life or death. This was, sons against fathers. General Grant was probably the best person at the right time to be able to win the Civil War for the North. Interesting history, how he came down the Mississippi River and initially attacked the South from the west heading to the east, and ultimately prevailed and ultimately ended up in the Oval Office. General Grant had some hard days and spent a lot of time drinking in the White House, and delegated a lot of these issues. But he did say, I suggest for your earnest consideration, the most earnestly recommended a constitutional amendment, making it the duty of each of the several states to establish and forever maintain free public schools, forbidding the teaching in said schools of religious, aesthetic, or pagan tenets. Well, he got James Blaine, a congressman from the state of Maine, to follow through, who attempted to modify the First Amendment. In Blaine's wording, no state shall make any law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, and then added Grant's words into that to maintain free and religious free public schools. Well, the Blaine Amendment, it passed the House of Representatives, but was never brought up in the Senate. Makes me sad. As we move into the post-Civil War era, we move into a time of vast expansion. That vast expansion included the Great Migration from southern plantations to the north, to the industrious world of factories and car making, and vast amounts of money, during the Gilded Age. I was reading something about the sculptor Rodin, who called this period La Belle Époque, meaning it was the beautiful period, before the First World War. As we move into this period, we start to assume this sense of this sense of American exceptionalism, that we're pretty special, and we were. And I think Susan Jacoby sums this up well. If you're in the League of Women Voters and you haven't gotten a copy of Free Thinkers by Susan Jacoby, most of the book is about women's rights. It talks a lot about the formation of women's rights in Seneca Lakes with, I think it was Susan Anthony was a part of this. But wonderful book. A little bit is about religion, where she says, in the cultural and political debate over these issues, there was always a strong undercurrent of conflict of the proper role of religion and the limits of religious influence on civil society. A conflict not between secularism and religion, but within religion itself. This American exceptionalism continues to grow. It begins to be a belief that we're morally superior and unique and play a unique role. As we start to move away from the 50s and 60s in the realm of what we will call the Christian right, we begin to see that race can no longer be used as a tool to be able to bait people into, a fervor to get excited about social issues. We start to see other social issues pop up, like abortion. Abortion was not an issue before the late 70s and the early 80s. I mean, how many times do we have to get Roe to go through? I know a lot of you probably, you fought for Roe back in the early days. But this American exceptionalism also takes place in religious circles too. The James Dobsons, the the Jerry Falwells. Yes. So this unique religious exceptionalism becomes, I think, the jumping off point for what we're seeing today in religious nationalism. We talked a lot about this concept in our group, and interestingly, Mina Hayes, we skipped that slide. Mina Hayes is a retired United Methodist minister who was part of the group. We had Norma Shettles. She was great at bringing in new information, contemporary articles. And then Pam Parks and Michelle Sweeney were both retired emergency room docs. But Mina, as a United Methodist minister, was adamant about not letting this concept of the springboard of religious exceptionalism go, because in her belief, that's how we got to where we are today. With American exceptionalism, I want my flag back. I want to be proud. And when people say, USA, USA, I don't want to feel bad. I want to feel good. Other examples of exceptionalism, Mormons believe the same. They believe that this was going to be the promised land. We have some who believe that the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence were supremely inspired. Scott, my Quaker buddy, was excited about civil religion, but civil religion then forces us to pick a religion. Great concept, but he and I argued about the differences between a civil religion and humanism. The idea of American exceptionalism has been used to inspire the nation, but has been criticized for implying a sense of superiority that can fuel racism and warmongering. I think we're all of a vintage where we know Lyndon Johnson. Great video of him on YouTube, if you look it up. One that's as a retired doc, one that's near and dear to my heart. There was, I'm gonna roam here a second. So there was 6 or 8 doctors in their white coats from the American Medical Association who were trying to talk Lyndon Johnson out of passing Medicare because it would have cut into their pocketbooks. And Lyndon Johnson, in his way, said, "How about them boys in Vietnam? Them boys in Vietnam, they're just knocking it out. They're just doing such a great job. And how about that Medicare? That's just like them boys in Vietnam. It's great stuff." And he turned and walked out the door. You know, and it was his way of negotiating. In this case, the Johnson amendments came about because when Johnson was running for the U.S. House, he ran into J.L. Hunt, who called him a communist during the Red Scare. And Johnson realized that I need to do something pretty fast here to make this change. The Johnson amendments gave churches tax benefits if they refused to preach politics from the pulpit. The churches thought, this is great. J.L. Hunt had been preaching from the pulpit and using the churches against Lyndon Johnson. So when the Johnson Amendment, which is an amendment to the IRS code, was passed, that created the tax advantages that we know today for churches, so that churches now are, at least my buddy John the Baptist is pretty upset that he can't preach politics from the pulpit. There's a group in Pueblo called Forging Pueblo that has a pretty interesting approach. They formed a 501c4, a nonprofit organization, to be able to collect money and talk politics outside of their 501c3. It's the only time that I know in Colorado that that's happened, but there are active approaches to bypassing the Johnson Amendment. I said earlier that we're here to talk about the things that we stand for. We all know what this slide means. And I don't think this conversation is complete without acknowledging that this took place. Jesus is my savior, Trump is my president. Susan Jacoby again, even though more Americans may be viewing issues through a secular lens, the influence of religion at the highest levels of government has never been stronger and more public. This contradiction has surfaced repeatedly in American history. Hardcore fundamentalist religion has always flourished during periods of increasing secularization, and its adherents tend to be more single-minded than secularists. Most secularists will vote for a religious believer who represents the separation of church and state. But few fundamentalists will vote for a secularist who denounces religious influence on government. I'm still trying to understand what's at the core of this untouchable aspect of religion that you can't speak badly against it. You can't speak, we have this quiet, this sense of standing for religion. And I'll be the first to tell you, I'm here to stand for people's right to exercise their freedom of religion. But I think we also live in a time where religion is becoming weaponized. I have a good friend who's, he belongs to a pretty liberal church. And he said to me the other day, today's a great day to be a Christian. And he got me thinking about this, that is it a great day to be a Christian? He does a lot of work with homeless populations. He's leading the charge for protecting folks from ICE in our community. I talked to my buddy John the Baptist and said, is today a good day to be a Christian? And he said, oh, it's a terrible day. I'm conservative and people in my community are always challenging me about my beliefs. He calls himself a mud man. He says that the more mud you throw at me, the bigger I get. In the conversations on our webpage at lwvcolorado.org/study, I have a conversation with two gals from Interfaith Alliance. Interfaith Alliance is a group that brings together different religious bodies in the state for common issues. In fact, we had a long conversation about partisanship and how can we remain nonpartisan in a partisan world. But she described herself as a queer Christian. And she said, this is a terrible time to be a Christian. You know, I'm persecuted for my beliefs and for who I am. Keeping with the theme of religious freedom, is today a good day to be an Orthodox Jew? In America, this is a US citizen. I spoke to two friends of mine who are Orthodox and said, could we sit down and have a conversation about is today a good day to be a Jew in America? And they said, Jeff, no, I can't do that. John the Baptist says that, well, the Jews don't have to worry because they just sort of circle the wagons and they sequester themselves away from society. I don't see it that way, you know. The Orthodox community, perhaps, but Reformed Jews, no. I think they're fully integrated into society. This is a US citizen. She's walking down, what street are we on? Montefiore? She's walking down the streets of downtown Denver. What kind of challenges would this US citizen have in terms of freedom to practice her religion as she sees fit, free of conscience and respectful of other religions? I think it would be quite a challenge. This is our job. We are the leaders of this community. I love this comment where we're the leaders who we've been looking for. We don't have to look any further. We're the people who can enable religious freedom for this Muslim. I know it's kind of a funny picture, but 2,000 years ago, white buffalo woman came to the Lakota. Behind that picture is I'm gonna just try this here. Let's try that. White Buffalo woman came to the Lakota and said, there will become a time when the earth will need you, that you'll need to double down on care of the earth. To represent that time, I will return as a white buffalo. A white buffalo is not an albino buffalo. It's a buffalo that has a black nose, black eyes, black hooves. And on July 26th, this little white buffalo that you can't see behind the box was born in Yellowstone National Park. How do we respect a minority religion of US citizens? And I think to take this even one step further, the Apache use Oak Flats, which is southwest of Phoenix, as a ceremonial religious ground. Oak Flats has recently been discovered to contain copper. How do we reconcile capitalism with minority religious rights? Oh, now I did it. Okay, as we're talking, I have another point to make here, and we're almost done. I won't ask you for any money, I promise. But David Brooks, op-ed columnist in the Times, wrote an interesting article recently called "How Would a German View the MAGA Movement?" Has anybody read this? No, it's a good one to look up because in 1932, leading up to the Second World War, society became divisive. A good society would have an economy that would ebb and flow from, not so bad to not so good. It would have arts that would come and go. Humanitarian aid would come and go. And politics, it wasn't a zero-sum game. It would be something that, maybe you lost an election and the next one you won. But in 1932, politics became a zero-sum game. And he compares this time in history to where we are today with the politics of the MAGA movement, where if you don't win, you're a loser. My friend John the Baptist, he would never offer a dinner to indigent folks. He believes that helping someone, whether they're queer, whether they're poor, whether they need clothes, is to weaken them by weakening his cause to win this power struggle with religious nationalism. Now, I was brought up, what happened to the Good Samaritan? What happened to the gospel of Christ of helping the poor? In this concept of how this, believe it or not, the German's name was Schmidt, who wrote this article in 1932, but in this zero-sum game, kindness and mercy, there is no room for kindness, mercy, or pluralism. For me, pluralism is one of the goals that I'm looking for. What is in vogue with this kind of approach to not helping others is cruelty, because you'll do anything to win. And I think that's where we are today. If we could get these slides to change, I'd take you back to the position statement, but I think that's where we are today with religion. The vast majority of folks who practice religions in this country, I think practice a wonderful, I think wonderful Christians. When you study Islam, Islam is a beautiful religion. It's a religion of caring for others. Judaism, I've had the great fortune of I had a buddy at my wedding who was Orthodox. Interestingly, our wedding was on a Saturday. His dad was a rabbi and was in town, and he walked in his tuxedo 3 miles to get to our wedding. Good friend. Going back to our position, the League of Women Voters stands for the separation of church and state and religious freedom founded on religious pluralism, an individual conscience free of social or political influence by any religious body. These fundamental civil rights are threatened by religious nationalism. The First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution reads, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. The League of Women Voters of Colorado believes that the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause of the First Amendment are cornerstones of our democracy. And with that, I'll close and answer questions.
So that the people in their homes can hear your question. Or if you want to repeat every question.
Sure.
That's fine
I'm
too.
happy to repeat.
Okay.
You know, one question that we have been answering in a lot of cases, a lot of presentations is, well, are there other positions that would be similar to this? There's a position at the US level regarding individual civil rights. I don't believe that in this conversation about religious nationalism, a position on individual civil rights is focused enough, even though we want to make our positions broad, you know, to be lasting. I still believe this is needed. My goal with this would be that as the Tulsa case makes its way up to the Supreme Court, I want to add an amicus brief from the League of Women Voters. Yes, we don't make positions just to make positions. We make positions to be active. Who's got a question? I think Jeanette, was it?
Yeah, this may be immaterial, irrelevant, or whatever his since opponent says, but when the Tripoli Treaty was rewritten, is there information about why that phrase was left out?
The question is, with the Treaty of Tripoli, in the first go round, it stated that the United States was not founded as a Christian nation. And after Washington, Jefferson, and Adams all failed to pay they called them the Musclemen, I think, the Muslims at the time. They failed to pay, and the treaty was rewritten. And the words of "we were not founded as a Christian nation" were left out. There's been many a law school conversation about that. Most people believe that it was redundant, that, you know, simply didn't need to go into the treaty. I see that that's arguable, and I understand that for some people, I think it's a small point to stick with. John the Baptist told me, well, you know, the founding of the country is clearly mapped out as being Christian in George Washington's farewell address. And so, of course, I went and did the homework and looked up George Washington's farewell address. And his only mention of religion in his farewell address was that religion is a spring for society. Now, that could be a spring in the side of a hill. It could be a spring that lifts you forward. So a lot of times the grammar is challenging, but no, to answer your question specifically, nobody has a good reason for that for the Treaty of Tripoli. Yeah, so
I have a two-part question. Number one, Colorado passes this position, and the league here gets consensus to include this position. If the league here gets consensus to include this position in Colorado's position statements, do you plan to take it to the national convention? So that's the first part of my question, because in order for the League of Women Voters of the U.S. to write an amicus brief around Oklahoma's case or other cases that are going to come up, they need to have a position on religious freedom. Are we the first step, Colorado?
yeah, we are the first step. Yeah. Beth and I have talked about let me say in a positive way, once this position is approved, that we first go to Oklahoma and have a concurrence, and then start to build concurrences prior to the 2026 National Convention. I went to the National Convention in Washington with Thalia, and I was amazed. Anybody here been to a national? It's fast moving, you gotta be on your game. And most importantly, if you wanna have your position approved, you need acceptance by national. That seems to be the only way that you can get it through. You can try to push with, like Maine with the healthcare, single payer healthcare that they had, they just couldn't push it through this last go round. So yes, I am now formally publicly saying, yes, I will take this to national.
Paying attention.
Yes, they are. They're fully aware of what we're doing. I had a conversation at the last national meeting with two of the staff members there. They know, yeah.
One is just a comment. In a recent film just this week on Thomas Jefferson on PBS, they spent some time on this issue. And the stress there was all the founding fathers were so familiar with the tight-knit combination of the Anglican Church and the king and rulership that way, that they made a deliberate decision not to preface with under God, that kind of thing, because they emphasize the inherent rights of the human being over the emphasis on God, specifically because they were trying to reject that perspective that had come down from Europe. My second, this is more of a question. My understanding of that Johnson amendment was that churches could not support specific candidates, but they could discuss political issues. I mean, churches all over the place are talking about immigration and healthcare and that kind of stuff, and still maintain a tax-free perspective, is my understanding. And although certainly Trump has said he's going to take that away. So, but I think the big issue is you cannot support a specific candidate.
Okay, first was a comment about a show on PBS with Thomas Jefferson and how they wrestled with the challenges associated with building the Constitution, writing the Constitution and religion. And then the second question was related to the Johnson Amendment about limitations on the church. And I think it would be very similar to the way that the League of Women Voters is structured. You know, we can talk about the issues like immigration, but we're not going to talk about the individuals. You know, that would be partisan. Yeah.
It actually says, the Johnson Amendment is a provision in the US tax code that prohibits all 501c3 nonprofit organizations from endorsing or opposing political candidates.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Who else?
So we did have a
Yeah.
question on line. How can we explain in God we trust on our coins? That's an exploding question.
Say that again?
In God we trust, on point.
Oh, this comes up every time. Don't we all have moments of weakness? Yeah. After the Civil War, In God We Trust came onto money, as did Masonic symbols. You know, the pyramid and the eyeball, the evil eye on the dollar bill. But then also, one nation under God, indivisible. That came up after the Red Scare. Yeah. And I think the House was saying, well, sure, fine, this has been tough. We'll give you a little something here. I I struggle, but when I came into this study, I would have put my dukes up and said, we need to eliminate that. That needs to go away. I don't know if those are the hills to die on. You know, they may be tradition. Even in Park County, for instance, there's county commissioners give a Christian prayer before they begin their meeting. You're supposed to stand. In defiance of the Park County commissioners, our league members choose to sit. And immediately they're labeled as not being a part of the group. So where do you make these stands? And I think we have much bigger fish to fry than trying to change the dollar bill. You know, that, I mean, that would be a tough one, but we might want to just change the Speaker of the House instead. You know, that might be easier. Yeah, yeah. Yes, sir.
I may have missed this, but how do you define religious nationalism?
Yeah, we did have a slide for that and say a little prayer here. I'll be the first to tell you that it's a difficult. Oh, we're going back a little bit more. It's a difficult entity to describe because it's fluid. It's constantly changing. We said that our group defines religious nationalism as an actualized act. So this is something has to occur to either create a civil rights violation. This could be a law. It could be that Lauren Boebert, you know, moves through Congress that all stores will be closed on Sundays in observance of the Lord's Day. Well, it's not everybody's Lord. Maybe we should close on Saturdays to observe, you know, the Jewish holidays. But religious nationalism it prohibits free exercise and it prohibits your individual conscience to be able to have free exercise of religion. Now, we've had other definitions through there about how Andrew Seidel says it blurs the lines, that it's an attempt to gain privilege. So that it's a lot of different things. And that's what the stoplight analogy was too, to try to understand the subtleties of religious nationalism. The focus here tonight is on Christian nationalism, but we also want to make this study broad. So in as many cases as we possibly can, we talk about religious nationalism.
Thank you. I don't mean to be too cynical about this, but position definitions that you put up, legal women voters, strike me as a prime example of a tautology. We believe in the freedom of religion because we believe in the freedom of religion. I think the lady in the first row had it exactly right. If you look at the history of how this country was established, and there's a particularly good book that I keep recommending to people by a scholar named Gary Wills. I don't know if you've read any of this stuff. Yeah. He is a devout Catholic, but his theme is that this country was established and the Constitution was set up as a reaction to the combining of religion and ruling by monarchs in Europe and England, from which people were fleeing. I think, and again, this reflects my cynicism about the US Supreme Court, if we're going to convince people that this is not a Christian-based country or constitution, I think we ought to be using the Supreme Court's originalist approach to looking at the Constitution and go to sources like wills, and I'm sure there are other sources, and not just regurgitate the language of the First Amendment, but say the founders, by reputable scholarship, never intended this country to be a Christian-based or religiously based country. So that's my suggestion.
Yeah, I see your point. Fortunately or unfortunately, the rule of law is founded upon case law.
Oh, I know that. I'm a lawyer, so.
Okay.
Although that is ephemeral as
Yeah.
the First Amendment in the hands of this Supreme Court.
Exactly, but we need to have some kind of an anchor, a tether to reality. And that's where, I mean, I see the Constitution being broken apart, even in the first 2 weeks of this presidency. The challenge is, I think, standing up against a very challenging 9-member US Supreme Court that, as I said before, leaves these doors open. For instance, the Majestic case from Denver, when that case went before the Supreme Court, it was a case of civil rights for a gay couple wanting a cake, you know. But Clarence Thomas turned it around and made it into a case that was the gay couple was violating the religious rights of the Christian cake maker. What? You know?
Well, again, I'm not gonna debate this, but we have the free exercise provision and the establishment provision. And what I think we're looking at is the freedom or the free exercise of religion to establish religion as part of our governing history. And I think that's, you know, obviously that's not what the Constitution says.
We used to have one more line in the position that said we firmly believe in the free exercise and establishment clause. And another attorney said, you better be careful with those words, because when those become weaponized, they could be turned around on you. You know, that you believe in the free exercise. Well, you know, here's the cake maker's right to free exercise in contrast to the civil rights of 2 other people. You know, so that line was taken out of the position based on a conversation. Yeah, thanks for your comment. Yeah, did you have anything further to say related to that? Yeah.
Mine's not a brilliant question. When I first started looking at, hearing about this study and reading a little bit about it, and then I promise I did not read all 30 pages, but I was kind of overwhelmed with the continual use of the word Christian nationalism. And it seems to me that's been changed, and now it's religious nationalism. So I think you referred to that a little bit when you answered a previous question, but I'd like to just maybe hear a little bit more about why.
Yeah, it was intentional because we don't want to be partisan. We want to look at the issues. The problem is that the contemporary problem in this country is not religious nationalism, it's Christian nationalism. But we want to write the study.
Which is the religious nationalism.
True, yeah, true. Yeah, but it's not Islamic religious nationalism, you know, or Jewish religious nationalism. Those are other countries that have those problems. But you hit the nail on the head. We have intentionally tried to broaden the wording to tone down any reference to Christian nationalism and only use that in specific indications. Okay.
And just as a comment to that, prime example of a different kind of religious nationalism is Iran. That's Shia Islamic fundamentalist nationalism.
Sure. Yeah, there are some countries who function well with a non-democratic, really, but I mean, these are countries that there is no room for, you know, an alternative voice. That's why we, in the study, included the approach to religious freedom of the Jewish community, of the Islamic community, and in most of those cases said you're free to think what you want to within the community, but you can't go outside of the community. You know. Anyone else? Well, thank you guys. I love these conversations. I really appreciate the help of putting this together, Sue. Really, thank you. Yeah, thank you. And remember it, you know, in this Presbyterian world, just get out of it what you read, like your dad said.
I want to thank everyone who came here intrepidly to this room tonight. I also want to remind you of our upcoming briefings. On February 18th, we will have a briefing about the National Western Center that was established here in using bond issues that League supported, I think, years ago. And also talking about what it has to offer, but also what its impact has been on the near neighborhoods that surround it, and those being neighborhoods that were traditionally disenfranchised in this community. Then on March 4th at 5:30 by Zoom, not in person, we will present our federal judicial system study. That's like a Civics 101 class on our federal judicial system. We are doing this as an educational preamble to the League of Women Voters of the U.S., presenting a position or positions around the federal judicial system, which they have not previously had. They've had positions about Congress, and they've had positions about the executive branch, but not about the third branch, the federal judicial system. So that will be on Zoom, all local leagues. And we hope that Jeff, you and Thalia will spread the word, can tune into our Zoom presentation. We thank you for being here tonight. We thank you for coming all the way to Denver to meet with us and for going around the state to make this presentation. And we want to thank all the people that were involved in the study in addition to you, Jeff. So thank you again.
Any questions? You need to come to consensus?
We will have to discuss how we're going to do that process here. I have not been part of a consensus before, but we have some wonderful people who are culture carriers who have been around League for 30 years or more, who will help us devise our system here. It was helpful for you to present the information that you did about arriving at a consensus. And I think you said the dates are by March 31st. You want us to?
Time to come together to find consensus. Also, as of March 1st, the study will not change anymore. The slide will not change anymore, and the position will not change.
So what Jeff just said, for those of you at home, is as of March 1st, the study will not change anymore, the slides will not change anymore, nor will the wording in the position about religious freedom change, and it will all be on the web at the State of Colorado Legal Women Voters website. So we will have to have a discussion, our board here, our executive committee and our board will have a discussion about how we will carry out this process, and we will let all members of the Denver League know how we're going to do that. Okay, any other questions, any other concerns before I say good night all?
Bobby said online, happy 105th birthday.
Oh, Bobby Heiserkamp said, happy 105th birthday to League of Women Voters of the USA.
Yay.
So,
Thank you to Jeff and Thalia for everything.
You're welcome.
yeah, great. Thank,
Was Leo.
so everybody get home safely who's here, and you at home stay warm. Good night.
As always.